The event that we're at here, the Knowledge Laboratory, is I bring people together to work together to confront the way they use the future.
Welcome to this Knowlab to evaluate and improve the use of foresight in addressing societal challenges.
The term using the future is somewhat unfamiliar for a lot of people because people don't think of using the future like you use a tool.
To use the future is to use a time and a place that doesn't exist yet, and that allows you freedoms to talk about things in a different way than if you're talking about them in the present.
Or when we talk about using the future, we should say using the knowledge that we have about the determinants of the future.
So in a knowledge laboratory that's aimed at developing people's futures literacy as a learning process, learning by doing, and with each group you talk about something that they care about, their future, something that they think is important.
So I want to give you an example. In Ghana, we are getting a group of people together every month, creatives, thinkers, lawyers, architects, artists, musicians, anybody who's creative by nature. And we're getting them together to think about, to one, explore what's happening on the ground. How are people imagining or reimagining our culture, our art, our buildings with a particular purpose in mind? We know that Africa is going to almost double in the next 20 years. Will be the youngest continent in the world. And no one has thought through, at least no one that we can see, how to address this, both this opportunity and some people call it a challenge. So this means that anybody who can think creatively out of the box can imagine something that's never been seen before and come up with creative solutions to address this. We want to get those people in a room. We want to encourage people.
So I was on a team that went to Myanmar or Burma, and we put together the Myanmar Futures Exchange, which was at the time the largest and actually the first foresight event to get people together and to give them tools to think about the future. And what we found in those contexts was that it really allowed people to have new conversations. It allowed them to challenge existing norms. In a place like Myanmar or Burma, you have all sorts of norms related to elders. So initially, if you would have a conversation, the elder would speak and everybody else would listen. But the tools and exercises that we used and created allowed for more collaborative, more participatory means of examining things that were happening today and also the future context.
As they talk about it and they think about it, they realize that they have assumptions. They realize that they're using the future for planning or for preparation.
We worked with an urban engagement group called Social Life, but also with technology and engineering companies like Arup and also some science fiction writers to imagine different kinds of Londoners in a decade's time, so in 10 years' time. We talked not just about Londoners who are high-flying businessmen and women, but also about Londoners who really care about their city, want to create new kinds of communities. And finally, we talked about Londoners who could really be suffering in a future. So we used the future as part of a campaign. We didn't just use it to do an exercise that we published in a journal or in a paper in a corner somewhere. We were very noisy about the future, and I think that really helped people in that difficult situation talk about the kind of future they want, and not just the kind of future that London's assembly or politicians want.
So I was really very privileged and lucky to work on two cases, Nairobi and Chennai, where the job was to deliver scenarios of how these cities could look very different or have different futures, and then given those futures, what are the decisions that people in the informal sector could take to empower themselves. And the project, and it was not just about generating scenarios about how things could be different, it was very much structured around, well, if you've got these scenarios and you experience what that life could be like, what do you do then? And on the basis of that, generating ideas of how to improve lives, given these incredible constraints of being poor, being in the informal sector, being outside of sort of the regular system.
And they begin to question their assumptions. They begin to realize that if they change their assumptions, they change their idea of the future. And they begin to see that their are different ways of thinking about the future. And this builds up people's futures literacy.
We were working with Greece just before its kind of fairly significant crisis, and we were working on kind of thinking about the future of democracy, frankly, that was years out, but the reality was the real future, the crisis, was actually only days out. And so in fact, the question of what is democracy didn't really matter when you were basically saying, does the country even exist?
Using the future in crisis situations helps us actually deal with crisis.
So in a way you can strengthen people, you can build up resilience in your society by providing people tools to acknowledge that the first reaction is fear, but there are other possibilities, and that they can, by taking a step back and using future thinking, allow them to have hope, to think about possibilities, and also to share these thoughts. Resilience is also about being connected with people. So doing the future thinking, sharing the future images with other people will also help you to accept what is happening now and to have kind of shared dreams of better futures.
Why is that concept critical for us? Because, I mean, people, particularly poor, vulnerable people, face constant challenges, crises, and chronic stresses. And resilience is basically a concept for us to think about how can we strengthen their ability to deal with those challenges in a better way and to emerge from them more strongly. And it's interesting, there is actually a strong relation to using the future and future methodologies, because one of the elements to think about resilience that strengthen the resilience of individuals and communities is the ability to anticipate.
So the point about different ways of using the future and different anticipatory systems is that we're beginning to understand that all around us there are many kinds of anticipation, including a form of anticipation that's not preparatory, that's not about preparing, that's not about planning, which is saying I will allow my idea of the future to change continuously so that I can see the present in different ways. And we can begin to shift the contradiction that is really central to the current context we live in between diversity and freedom and planning and determinism. And we can become more comfortable with the idea that the unknown and the unknowable is central to our values of liberty, but it's also fundamental to our reality that continuously creates the unknown. And so instead of the unknown being an enemy, because it's detrimental to planning, we can find a way to be more balanced between planning and preparation and emergence and novelty.